The meeting room felt cold that morning. My hands trembled as Evan said my name like it was a joke. "Talia, this report is sloppy," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My cheeks burned. I had stayed up all night fixing the numbers because the client needed the update at 9. I explained how I had fixed the pivot table and the broken formula. Evan tapped his pen and smirked. "That's not good enough here. You need to be faster. Maybe this role is too big for you." Laughter popped from the back like small firecrackers. My stomach dropped. I wanted to prove him wrong, to show the version history, to show the late emails. Instead, I closed my laptop slowly and walked out. The fluorescent lights outside the room felt harsh. I went to the supply closet and hugged a stack of paper to my chest until my breath steadied. I wrote the time and his words in a notebook. I had been proud to work here for 3 years. I had never felt so small. That single morning was the start of something that would change everything. After the meeting, I sat in the supply closet until my hands stopped shaking. The copier hummed like a small engine. Jenna from HR knocked and asked if I was okay. I lied. "Fine," I said, wiping tears with the back of my hand. I had learned to hide. At home, my mother was sick, and I had been splitting my nights between hospitals and spreadsheets. Work had been my one steady thing. Now I felt it slip. Evan began to change how he treated me step by step. He gave me last-minute tasks other people avoided. He praised others for ideas I had suggested. I began to save every email, every message, every little mean note. Each item felt like a small stone I put into a jar. I told myself I was being careful, not weak. The jar filled fast. That afternoon, an intern named Marco sat beside me and watched how I worked. He asked shyly, "How do you stay calm?" I smiled and said, "I try to be true to the work." Marco looked at me with wide eyes. I felt seen for a moment, then alone again. The next week, Evan interrupted a client call I led. I had rehearsed the slides and double-checked the data. When I started to explain our timeline, he cut in. "Let me finish," he said, as if I were an actor and he was the director. The client thanked him. Later, in the chat, the client praised the clear plan Evan had given. I felt the words like a knife. I saved the chat and the recording. That night I opened my notes and typed everything I could remember. My coworkers began to clap more for Evan. He had a loud laugh that filled the room. I had a quiet way of solving problems that vanished under his voice. I tried to talk to Ben, a teammate, about the call. He shrugged and said, "Evan's the face of the team." It felt like a rule I could not change. I started to keep 2 calendars, one public and one private, so I could show my work when needed. The private one had timestamps and small notes like "fixed X at 2:14 a.m. I hoped those little facts would matter later. For now, they were my secret proof. One morning I found a sticky note on my desk. "Talia, trim your tone." It felt like a slap. I wrote a careful reply by email, asking for specifics. Evan answered with a short line, "Just be easier to work with." His words landed heavy. I forwarded the chain to my private file. That afternoon, he changed a project plan and blamed me for a date I never set. I stared at the spreadsheet and then at my saved versions. He had altered the plan and saved it under my name. I copied the file and put it in my secure folder. Each time he did something public, I tracked it. The team joked that I was organized. They did not know why I kept so many copies. Marco watched me one day and asked, "Are you saving these for a reason?" I said nothing, but I thought, I am saving them for a reason. The fear of being gaslit made my hands feel cold. I promised myself I would not let the story be rewritten. The new intern, Marco, started to ask more questions. He helped me run a data poll and watched when Evan rolled his eyes at us. After work, Marco sent me a message. "Do you want help gathering files?" I hesitated because I feared dragging others into drama. Then I realized having one witness could change things. Marco came early the next day with a USB stick and a kind face. He typed while I talked. He said quietly, "This behavior is wrong." His voice sounded small but true. That evening I printed a timeline of tasks and who approved them. Ben noticed and asked what it was. I said, "Just notes." He nodded and left it at that. The small supports felt fragile. But for the first time I felt like maybe I would not be alone. That night Evan sent a group email praising a plan he called our strategy. I opened my files and saw the draft I had shared days earlier. I saved a copy and added it to the timeline. Somebody was keeping score now. Evan started canceling our one-on-one meetings. Then he set up a surprise review with HR in the room. My stomach knotted as I sat down at the table. The review was vague and harsh. He listed things. He claimed I did not finish. I had emails that proved otherwise. HR listened but said little. Jenna's eyes flicked to my files and then to the ceiling. After the meeting, I asked HR for a written note of the review. They made an entry, but used soft words that did not match what Evan had said. I felt my options narrowing. I needed people to speak, not just records. The next day, Marco told me he had overheard Evan making fun of me in the kitchen. Marco offered to record. I wanted to say no, but the voice in me that kept the timeline said yes. If I wanted justice, I needed proof that others could hear. I felt terrified and oddly brave at once. The balance shifted slightly toward action. I pressed a record on my phone and hid it in my coffee cup. Evan walked in, chewing his words. "Talia is too soft for this industry," he said to a coworker. He laughed. The voice on the recording was clear and cruel. I listened later with my heart pounding. The small sound file felt heavy in my hand, like a rock I could toss into a still pond. I added the file to my private folder and emailed a copy to Marco and Ben, asking them to hold it. Ben replied with a short, "This is not okay." Evan's behavior got worse. He started to switch my tasks, causing missed timestamps and client confusion. I kept saving everything. The pattern was no longer one mean comment, but a plan. I sat in my car after work that night and cried, then wiped my eyes and wrote the date in my notebook. That week I found a message from another colleague who said they had been passed over for a promotion because Evan said they weren't ready. Now I had a sense this was bigger than me. Deadlines moved without notice. I logged into the project system and saw that tasks I had completed were reassigned and set to new deadlines that were impossible. My performance score dropped even though I had done the work. I built a timeline that matched every change with who touched the file. The pattern pointed to Evan. I sent a polite but firm email to the project approver asking for clarity. The approver replied that changes had been made by Evan. I sat back and realized I had hard proof now. The next day I asked 2 colleagues if they noticed the same behavior. One, Aisha, said quietly that Evan often fixed reports and then blamed the original author. She looked scared when she said it. The other, Ben, pretended not to hear. I felt a mix of hope and anger. If Aisha would speak, we could build a case. She agreed to copy me on an email that revealed a similar change she made months earlier. My folder swelled with evidence. The next step felt frightening. Take the evidence to HR. At the holiday party, Evan cornered me near the punch. He made a rude joke about my quiet face in front of others. The group laughed as if it was harmless. My cheeks burned and I swallowed my pride. Later that week, a coworker came to me and admitted they had seen Evan behave the same with others. Their words were small but important. Someone else had noticed. I added their name to my list of possible witnesses. I wanted to go to HR immediately, but I feared being cut out or seen as a troublemaker. Instead, I prepared a careful folder and made copies. I printed emails, saved recordings, and wrote short statements of memory for each incident. Marco offered to keep a backup of the files at his home. The thought of putting trust in someone younger made me nervous, but I accepted. The file felt heavy and real. That night, Jenna from HR sent a note saying she was aware of some tension and wanted us to wait for a formal process. I felt stalled. Waiting felt like being stuck in a room that was getting smaller. I met with HR to discuss the folder. Jenna listened but told me HR needed multiple written complaints to start a full investigation. She said they could not act on one person's word alone. My heart dropped. I had files, but HR wanted more names. 2 colleagues agreed to tell their stories, but whispered about fear of retaliation. I realized I had to convince others to come forward. I asked Marco if he would be a witness. He said yes without hesitation, and I felt a bright relief. Then Aisha texted and said she would also speak if needed. I felt a cautious hope. But that very night, Evan sent a passive-aggressive email praising team loyalty and transparency. I read it and felt the threat wrapped in kind words. The hunt for witnesses had begun, and I knew the next weeks would be tense. 2 colleagues came forward privately and shared similar stories. Aisha brought old messages where Evan had blamed her for a missed entry that she had fixed. Ben, who had been quiet, gave me a small document with dates of when Evan interrupted him in meetings. Marco sent a file with his recorded kitchen conversation. HR began to look more interested as the number of witnesses grew. Still, people were afraid. One colleague, who wanted to help, asked to stay anonymous. HR said they preferred named testimonies. I felt torn between protecting people and building a strong case. Then an ex-employee reached out through LinkedIn and offered to talk about their exit interview. Their message hinted at long-term patterns. I sent everything to HR and asked for a formal meeting. My hands shook. The risk felt higher. Evan began to act colder at work, watching me with a quiet smile. I kept piling evidence into my secure folder like stones for a wall. I filed a formal complaint through the company portal, with my evidence attached. The portal auto-acknowledged it and gave a case number. For a moment I felt relief. But HR replied that anonymous claims were limited and that named testimonies weighed more. They wanted interviews with at least 3 witnesses who would speak on record. I had 2 confirmed and 1 shaky. The portal said an investigator would be assigned. My phone buzzed all day with quiet messages. Evan seemed to sense the change. He started to assign me work with impossible timelines, perhaps to scare me into quitting. I refused to quit. Instead, I made secure backups and shared copies of my folder with a lawyer friend. They gave me advice on protecting myself and told me to keep calm. The nights grew harder as fear edged closer. But the file grew thicker, and suspicion crept into Evan's face. One morning I discovered Evan had altered a project document and saved it under my name. The change made me look like I had missed a step. I compared the file to my saved version and saw the edits were clear. I copied both and sent them to HR with a short note. This was changed without my approval. HR read the files and paused. That same afternoon, Evan tried to ambush me in a meeting with selective data meant to make me look incompetent. I presented my timeline and the original document. He stuttered and pushed back, saying it was a mistake. The room felt tense. People shifted in their seats. For the first time I saw doubt in Evan's eyes. He was used to controlling the story. My documents had become a mirror he could not easily break. After the meeting, he avoided my gaze. The small shift felt like a crack in a dam. I knew it would not hold forever. A formal performance review was scheduled. Evan planned to use it to make me look bad. HR sat across the table with a neutral face. He brought a folder of selective data. I brought my timeline, recordings, and copies of altered files. When I spoke, I was calm. I showed the evidence of his edits and the kitchen recording where he mocked me. The room went quiet. Evan's face changed from smug to sharp. He attacked my character, called me defensive, and accused me of making trouble. HR asked follow-up questions and said they needed to investigate further. The review ended without a decision. Outside the room, whispers spread. Someone had emailed a copy of the kitchen recording to a small group. The leak was risky, but it meant more people heard the truth. I felt both frightened and oddly relieved. The story was out of just a few mouths and could not be easily swallowed back. The intern Marco leaked the private chat where Evan bragged about embarrassing staff. It spread quietly and more people read it. When he bragged, he did not expect anyone would save his messages. But a copy exists now in my file and others' inboxes. The office vibe shifted. People who had laughed before now looked down at their screens. HR called for an initial inquiry. Evan's ally seemed smaller. He grew colder and calculated. He started to check who was copying files and spoke less at group lunches. I got a message from an anonymous staffer that said more people were willing to come forward. I felt cautious. Still, HR had not made any final decisions. The company asked us to be patient as they interviewed witnesses. Waiting felt like stepping on a tightrope. If I slipped, I could lose my job. If I stood firm, I could change the arc of many careers. HR asked me to stay out of the office while they investigated. The sudden request stunned me. I packed a small bag and drove home, feeling like someone had closed a door in my face. The silence of my apartment felt loud. Jenna called and said the inquiry had widened and they needed to keep the process fair. I worried Evan would manipulate the system, but I also felt the case had momentum. An anonymous tip reached my phone that night. A former contractor had emails showing Evan's pattern of blame. I forwarded that tip to HR. They replied with a curt, "Thank you. We are reviewing." I breathed and then checked my secure cloud where I had copies of everything. The feeling of being watched did not leave. I started to plan my next step, make sure backups existed outside the company's servers. If Evan tried to delete evidence, the story would still live. The quiet in my apartment hummed with possible futures. An ex-employee named Roy emailed me with screenshots of messages Evan had sent years before. The messages showed a pattern of belittling and shifting blame to others. Roy's words were clear. He had left because he felt humiliated and powerless. I felt a surge of relief and horror. The pattern was not new. I sent Roy's files to HR. They replied quickly and scheduled a round of interviews. Evan sensed panic and told a senior leader that these claims were fabrications. I recorded his reply when he called me and added it to the folder. Now HR had old messages, recent recordings, and multiple witnesses. The case moved faster. Evan tried to rally support, but people were quiet when he walked by. I felt a deep tiredness mixed with a strange lightness. The truth had legs now, and it would not walk away. Evan left a threatening voicemail telling me he would damage my career if I did not drop the complaint. The voice was low and cruel. I saved the voicemail and sent it to my lawyer friend, who nodded and said it was good evidence. I felt fear pulse through me, but I also felt steadier. HR asked for more written statements and a list of witnesses. More people agreed to talk on record. My colleague Aisha stepped up and wrote a long account of edits and false blame. Ben gave a statement too. The weight shifted. Evan grew more frantic. He started to check project logs and accused others of leaking information. Yet his allies thinned. The board members began to hear whispers. I watched him at the coffee machine and noticed he no longer laughed loudly. The scene felt like the slow fall of a house of cards. Each card I had saved was now a push against the tower. HR called a formal meeting and asked Evan to respond. He arrived confident, but the room felt larger than his swagger. The investigator played recorded calls, showed altered documents, and read messages from ex-staff. Evan stumbled over some answers and contradicted himself. HR paused to think and told him they needed time to review. After the meeting, he stared at me, and for the first time I saw real fear. He always wanted control, and he now had less. I felt unsure if that fear would turn to revenge. I hardened. I made extra backups and emailed copies to my lawyer. The office buzzed with a new tone, quiet and watchful. People approached me with small notes of apology. I answered with thank you messages but kept my distance. The waiting room of the process grew longer but felt cleaner, like trapped air being slowly released. The company legal team stepped in and began interviews with clients and vendors. Rumors spread. Some major clients asked for assurances. The board grew nervous. Evan's support inside the company collapsed slowly as more evidence emerged. He tried to delete messages, but cached copies and external backups existed. I had saved versions off the company's server and shared them with my lawyer. The legal team called me to ask questions, and I gave my timeline. They seemed serious. A few colleagues who had been silent before now spoke up. The truth began to leak into the client world. I felt the pressure shift away from me and toward Evan. He held on to his title, but his power was gone. He acted smaller, like a person with no quiet center. I thought about the years of small hurts and realized the path I had taken, saving messages, recording voices, had built a bridge to this moment. Someone posted about the investigation on an external forum. A staffer had leaked a rumor and the news spread. The post contained some of the chat logs and pushed the story into public light near our industry circles. Clients pinged the company with worried questions. Evan panicked and deleted messages, but cached copies remained. HR moved faster to control the damage. The board called an emergency session. I watched from a distance as the man who had derided me grew more frantic. Yet I was careful. I still kept copies of everything on my cloud. The leak made the whole thing real beyond our office. I felt a strange calm. What had seemed like a private horror was now public truth. People began to offer me support. The board could no longer ignore the pattern. The board suspended Evan pending the final hearing. He sent a defiant message to the team that read hollow. The company promised a fair and quick process. My colleagues looked at me with relief and pity. HR told me to prepare for the hearing, and I compiled a final file. The hearing would include board members, legal counsel, HR, and witnesses. My hands trembled as I organized copies and notes. A few people begged me to stay private and not be in the hall during the hearing. I said I would be present. I wanted to hear the truth told aloud. The suspension felt like a win, but also a warning. Powerful people could still retaliate. I slept poorly that night, but the file on my desk was heavy and complete. The day of the hearing approached, and the air felt electric with truth. The hearing began. Witnesses gave statements. People read emails aloud and played recordings. Evan's denials cracked under the weight of proof. A former contractor testified about past incidents I had never known. Board members asked hard questions, and Evan stumbled. He was asked to leave the room while they voted. The minutes felt slow. I sat with my file and breathed. When the vote came back, the board decided to terminate his employment. The room changed. He walked out with a stiff jaw and left the building. People watched with a mix of relief and sorrow. My chest felt strange, like a tight band loosening. I had not wanted to ruin a life. I wanted the truth. Seeing him go felt like both an end and a heavy beginning. The company had to fix the harm and promise change. That was the next step. The company released a public statement apologizing for harm and announcing policy changes. They offered settlements to affected staff and promised training. I read the words and felt tears prick my eyes. My name was not the headline, but my evidence had led there. Evan was reported to industry regulators. I received notes from coworkers thanking me for my courage. Some asked how to stop this in the future. I met with HR and the board to help design new processes. They listened, and some changes were made. I still felt hollow at times. Justice did not erase the years, but the company's actions signaled a shift. Outside, the news circulated in our industry, and other companies reached out to learn. My little jar of stones had become a wall that protected others. The cost had been high, but I hoped it would be worth it. After everything, colleagues hugged me in the elevator and said quiet thanks. Some avoided me, ashamed they had not acted sooner. I started a peer group and training program to protect staff from abuse and to teach documentation skills. Marco joined as a leader, and Aisha volunteered to run meetings. We created a safe place where people could share and find witnesses. I still check my secure cloud sometimes, as if the past could return. But most days I felt lighter. I walked into the office one morning and saw a new policy poster about respectful work. I pinned a small note in my file. We did this. My mother smiled at my calls. The hurt of the years did not vanish, but the exposure had made things better. I had guarded my truth and used it to change a system. Standing there, I breathed in deep and felt the odd mix of relief and responsibility. The story of 3 years of abuse ended, and a new chapter began, one where the quiet work could be seen and where people learned to stand together. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and tap the bell to get notified the moment we drop a new story, and don't forget to like the video to help others find it.